It is the most useless. It is not even an effective defense against itself. A great storm will ravage Europe. Headlines across the continent read as such, as the effects of Black Monday begin to take their toll. After the First Weltkrieg, Germany gained for herself a place in the sun, taking large swaths of Africa, critical points in Europe, and a boom in global influence. Austria, having been along for the ride as an ally, secured a more total control over her lands and a mitigation of opposition to her will in the Balkans and Italy. Their combined victory, signed into history at the beginning of 1920, has led to the continuation of the monarchical regimes of old. With the Hohenzollern and von Habsburg families at the helm of the institution, they have an opportunity to adapt it to the changing times. As Black Monday, the Berlin stock market crash of 1936 shows, however, such adaptation is sorely lacking. The economy now depressed, a large portion of German and Austrian citizens are left destitute. Unrest in civil society increases by the day. In Britain, the situation is quite similar. With the socialist uprising after their defeat in the Weltkrieg, the loyalist government became increasingly reactionary, returning to greater absolutism under Edward VIII. This ideological détente with Germany, having brought Britain closer to Berlin politically, also brought economic integration as well. What is felt in Berlin is felt in London all too much. Also having lost most of its empire 2 decades ago, it seems Britain is now a brother, rather than the father of Europe in the geopolitical scene. Other continental brothers, having shielded themselves from the crash before it ever was conceived, include France, Russia, and Italy. Their original governments from before the Weltkrieg having fell after civil war, the three form what is colloquially called the Red Entente. In Russia and Italy, the strongmen of Joseph Stalin and Benito Mussolini lead their communist states with a rigid hand in all spheres. In France, a more democratic means of governance rules the land, with syndicalism leading the way instead of totalism. Despite their differences, all three form the leading edge of the Communist Internationale and deeply oppose the capitalist economic model as it exists in Berlin. As such, while they do feel the effects from the crash, their citizens consider themselves insulated from the poverties elsewhere. Their leaders, however, are not simply undisturbed, but excited by the course of events in Berlin. Vengeful for a return to what they call a just peace, the trio scramble to bring their armies and supply lines into working order. In support, industrial working shifts are lengthened and output quotas are increased. The only question remaining is which one of them wants revenge the most. During the late hours of March 22, 1940, Russian troops take their first steps into the Kingdom of Lithuania, igniting war between themselves and Germany. Communications are dispatched across the continent within the hour. France and Italy join Russia, while Britain aids Germany in her efforts. In Eastern Europe, the fight is largely equal. The vastness of the Soviet military, air force, and land mass allow it to fight commendably with Germany on land. In Western Europe, however, the situation is not as fortunate. Lacking in the air and on land and sea, France is failing against the naval invasions of Normandy and Bordeaux. In addition, Paris is close to capture from the north. With Anglo-German advancement ongoing, Wilhelm II amuses German media outlets, saying that Schlieffen was right all along. Despite the progress, Austria, while remaining pro-Germany, maintains neutrality. Working towards continued federalization of the empire sits as their top priority. Thus, without Austrian pressure in the region, the House of Savoy leading Sardinia relay their claim to all of Italy with British backing. Germany lets the claim move forward, seeking to maintain their alliance with Britain. With With French surrender imminent, Italian morale plummets. Mussolini's government puts up little resistance as Entente and Reichspakt forces envelop the country. Though the Milanese Commune will live on for years to come, the Western Front is largely concluded. With the fall of the Western Communists, the full focus of Germany and her allies is now turned on to the Soviets. This, however, does not seem to much trouble Stalin nor his Politburo. In many ways, the war situation favors the USSR, at least slightly. During the interwar period, German innovation, while it continued to meet expectations, did not really keep pace with the magic it had during the Weltkrieg. If anything, faith in the institution was receding, and ultimately considered null as Black Monday fell, only returning as war seemed near. For the Soviets, though, large industrialization measures were taken to revolutionize society, which led to both a vast growth in innovation, but also a willingness to work outside the lines more than ever. While the Allies in France and Italy revolutionized their industry and production little, due to largely already being industrialized, the intercultural dialogue only helped to strengthen the forces of growth in the USSR. In the communication sphere, Reichspakt radio and the Soviet All-Union radio are vying for the hearts and minds of the people of the nations between the two empires. While not truly finding the Soviet cause endearing, to enough people it seems a better alternative, considering especially that Black Monday came out of German capitalism. Day in and day out, this point is driven home across the airwaves. In addition, sayings of grand plans are shared, especially from Stalin. We are making sure this war will have Schlieffen die to history, just as Wilhelm died in reality only so long ago. Though the Reichspakt makes the case to listeners that the invasions of Arkhangelsk and Krasnodar are being held, German quips nowadays are few and far between. Despite these advantages for the Soviets, it seems the war is not yet close to any sort of conclusion by way of military victory. With the war now having drudged on 5 years and 11 million casualties in the East alone, the two sides are looking to mend their differences via peace talks. The first consideration between them is where to meet. Neutral cities such as Madrid, Vienna, and Geneva are considered. Most of the complaints are from the Soviets. They claim Madrid is too far away, Vienna too German, and Geneva too close to the rival of Republican France. Eventually, however, agreement is reached. The capital of Sweden, Stockholm, shall be the host city. Historically neutral during the Weltkrieg, and close to both of their borders but not necessarily any fighting, Sweden welcomes the request. Soon the foreign ministers of both states and their envoys leave Berlin and Moscow. From Berlin comes Konstantin von Neurath, in his position since 1932, whereas Vyacheslav Molotov, in his own since 1940 after the war began, comes from Moscow. Talks start off rather amicably, but the demands being presented by both sides are far off. The Soviets, looking towards restoration of the past, ask that all of Eastern Europe, from Warsaw to Yerevan to Helsinki, be ceded their way. The Germans, in their view modestly, ask that Poland, Lithuania, and Finland maintain their independence. With anger on the Soviet side and cynicism from the German, the final statements of the discussion were recorded, coming out a decade after the war. From Molotov: "How can one disagree with our terms? We are holding, nay advancing, on one of the largest fronts known to all of human history, and our men are invigorated. We are unstoppable." After a moment, from von Neurath: "Well, we are immovable." With the failed talks, the character of the war takes a turn for the worse. In German and Soviet society, where there used to exist some semblance of hope in that the war would end, there now exists only a feeling of gut-wrenching despair. The people wonder, from what source shall an end come? In both administrations, that same question is asked almost daily by every individual. With the recent addition of Austria joining on the side of Germany, strategists in Berlin believe it is only a matter of time that an end will come, falling in their favor. In particular, they cite the naval invasion north of Moscow as being quite intrusive to Soviet operations. They predict that if one were to maintain the front and push west towards the Allies in Finland, that would be enough of a blow to bring down the Soviet cause. Stalin, however, is not so nonchalant. In 1933, the Politburo approved secret measures for Operation Firebird, which outlined plans for the creation and detonation of a nuclear fission warhead. Since its inception, however, the project has produced no final product. Despite this, Stalin believes that in order to finish the war, Firebird must be completed and its product used as a final bargaining chip against Berlin. He commands that work on the project increase threefold. After a few months of work, Berlin gains notice of operations in the USSR. Themselves lagging behind, the Germans attempt to gain on the Soviets. Between the two, however, the innovative edge the Soviets had continues to hold. On November 1, 1949, a successful nuclear test takes place at an uninhabited and undisclosed location in Siberia. With the work of research largely completed, now the most difficult decision of the project arises for Stalin and his Politburo. Another warhead already in storage, they must consider how this one shall be used to pressure the Germans. Within the Politburo, many argue that for the great lengths Germany went to weaken Russia after the Weltkrieg, it is only right to repay them with a greater act. Others argue such an act would humiliate, only worsening the situation. In the end, the 13 members vote with a 7-6 count. The next day, the warhead is loaded for delivery, and a handful of crews tasked to fly to Berlin. Meeting steep resistance upon crossing over the German border, the delivery bomber is shot. It begins to descend into the puffy ether below. On August 15, 1951, a nuclear explosion takes place in the countryside of Posen in Germany. Reports circle back to Berlin within the hour.